I was driving cross-state late one night. Rain hitting the windshield so hard the wipers could barely keep up, and the GPS kept losing signal out there in the middle of nowhere. So when I saw a flickering neon sign that said, "Vacancy," I figured I'd stop for the night before I ended up wrapped around a tree. The place was called the Pine Hollow Motel, one of those old roadside joints you'd see in a 70s postcard. Just a row of doors under a dripping metal awning and a buzzing ice machine that looked like it hadn't worked since forever. I parked under a busted streetlight, grabbed my overnight bag, and ran through the rain to the office. Inside, it smelled like wet carpet and coffee that had been sitting on a burner for 12 hours. Behind the counter was this old guy in a plaid shirt watching a tiny TV with no sound. When I rang the bell, he jumped like I'd scared him out of a dream. I asked for a room for the night, and he squinted at me like he wasn't sure I was real, then handed me a brass key with a big plastic tag that said Room 9. He mumbled something about the heater being touchy and went back to staring at his TV. I didn't think much of it. I just wanted a shower and a bed. Outside, the rain came down even harder. Sheets of it, the kind that make everything look like it's melting. The numbers on the doors were faded, but I found room 9 between 8 and what looked like a storage closet. The key fit, but the door was weirdly stiff, like it hadn't been opened in a while. The room smelled musty, like damp wood and cheap air freshener. But it was clean enough: 2 twin beds, a little table, floral curtains. The usual motel stuff. I tossed my bag down and tried the TV, static only. The rain outside was so loud it almost drowned out the hum of the old air unit in the wall. I remember sitting on the bed, scrolling through my phone, no signal of course, thinking I'd just crash and leave early. Then I noticed something odd. There was a faint sound coming from the other side of the wall, like someone whispering real low. I figured it was just another guest. But when I checked the layout in the hallway, there shouldn't have been another room on that side. That wall faced the end of the building. It got weirder when I tried calling the front desk to ask about the heater. No dial tone. I sighed, pulled on my jacket, and went back to the office. The old man wasn't there, just the TV playing static now, no picture at all. There was a small notebook on the counter open to a page with scribbles, names, dates, but nothing for room 9. I called out a couple times, nothing. Then right as I turned to leave, the door behind the counter creaked open a little, like someone had been listening. I froze, waited, but no one came out. When I got back to my room, the door was open even though I knew I'd locked it. My bag was still there, but the lights were flickering like the power was struggling. I shut the door and told myself maybe the lock hadn't caught. I was tired, maybe imagining stuff. I lay down, rain pounding against the window, half asleep when I heard it again. The whispering, but now clearer, like someone speaking right against the wall. I pressed my ear to it and could barely make out a few words. Still here. My heart started racing. I knocked on the wall just once and everything went quiet. I waited, holding my breath. Then faintly 3 knocks came back. I jumped up, grabbed my stuff, and was about to leave when I saw something that stopped me. On the nightstand was a key, identical to mine, same tag, room 9, except it looked older, rusted, like it had been buried for years. That was enough. I bolted. When I got outside, the rain had turned to a drizzle, the neon vacancy sign barely glowing. I ran to the office again, but it was pitch black now. No TV, no lights. The counter was empty, and the notebook that had been there earlier was gone. I thought about leaving my key, but something told me to hold on to it. Proof that I'd actually been there. When I stepped outside again, I noticed something strange about the row of doors. They went from 1 to 8, then straight to 10. There was no room. 9. Not even a space where a door could have been. I just stood there in the rain, staring at that wall of old siding where my room had been. It looked solid, like it had never had a door at all. I didn't even bother trying to figure it out. I jumped in my car, heart pounding, and drove until I found a gas station 20 miles up the road. The clerk there looked at me like I was crazy, drenched, shaking, trying to explain what happened. When I told him the name of the motel, he frowned and said that place had been shut down for years, burned partway in a fire, never reopened. I showed him the key, but he just stared at it and said, "Man, Pine Hollow? That's been gone since before I was born." I drove back in daylight the next morning just to see for myself, thinking maybe I'd mixed up the roads or something. But when I found it, the sign was half collapsed, the building behind it gutted, black from smoke damage, windows broken out. There was no office, no ice machine, no lights, just ruins. But there was one thing that really made my stomach twist. On the ground near where the rooms would have been, I saw a piece of metal glinting in the sun. It was a brass door tag, half buried in the dirt. I dug it out, and sure enough, stamped into the metal was the number 9. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know if I was exhausted and hallucinating, or if I somehow slipped into something that shouldn't exist anymore. But every time it rains hard and I'm driving alone, I still see flashes of neon out in the distance, like that same broken sign flickering through the storm, calling me back. And sometimes, when the rain gets real loud against my window at home, I swear I can hear that whisper again through the wall. Soft, patient, just 2 words, still here. I was on my way back from visiting my sister in Denver when the storm hit. The rain came down like someone turned the sky upside down. Just sheets of water hammering the windshield so hard my wipers gave up. My phone kept losing GPS signal, and the road signs were barely visible in the dark. I was running on fumes, both in gas and in energy, when I spotted a flickering neon sign through the storm that said Sunset Pines, Motel. The name sounded nicer than the place looked. It was one of those old roadside motels with faded paint, sagging roofs, and a Coke machine that probably hadn't worked since the 90s. Still, it was late, I was soaked, and all I wanted was a bed and a roof. I pulled up, parked right in front of the office, and ran through the rain. Inside, the lobby smelled like mildew and old coffee. The front desk had a bell with a little handwritten sign that said "Ring for service." I hit it once, and a few seconds later, a woman came out from the back room. She was middle-aged, wearing a faded motel polo and a name tag that said Lydia. She smiled, but it felt forced, like someone pretending to remember how. When I asked for a room, she glanced at a dusty ledger instead of a computer and said, "You're lucky. Not many people stop here anymore. You can have room 12. She slid an old metal key across the counter. "Cash only," she added, and when I handed her some bills, she took them without counting and told me, "If you hear anything weird tonight, just ignore it. Storm messes with the pipes." Then she winked, like that explained everything. Room 12 was near the end of the building. The rain had turned the parking lot into a mirror, reflecting the sickly yellow light of the old lamps. The key fit, but the door stuck like it hadn't been opened in months. Inside, the room was basic: a single queen bed, old carpet, 1 lamp, and curtains that smelled faintly like cigarettes. The heater rattled but blew warm air, so I didn't care. I threw my bag down, kicked off my shoes, and sat on the bed scrolling through my phone, trying to get a signal. No luck. When I finally gave up and turned off the light, the rain tapping the window felt almost peaceful for about 10 minutes. Then I heard it, a knock. 3 soft taps on my door. I froze, listening. Nothing else. I checked the clock, 2:17 a.m. I figured maybe someone had the wrong room or a drunk. Guess got lost. I got up, peeked through the peephole, and saw nothing but rain. I was about to crawl back into bed when I heard it again. This time, not from the door, but from the wall. 3 knocks, slow, from the wall next to the bed. That's when it got weird. The wall on that side should have been the outside of the building. There wasn't another room next to 12. It was the end unit. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself maybe it was pipes like Lydia said, or thunder echoing weird through the walls. But when I put my ear against it, I could have sworn I heard breathing. Slow, deep breathing, like someone standing right on the other side. I backed away and left the lamp on the rest of the night. I didn't sleep much, just kind of dozed until dawn. When I went to check out, Lydia was gone, replaced by a man I hadn't seen before. He looked half asleep behind the counter. I asked him how long he'd worked there, and he said, since it reopened last month. I told him I'd stayed in room 12 and heard knocking during the night, and he frowned. "You sure?" he asked. "We don't rent out room 12. I laughed, thinking he was joking, but he wasn't smiling. He turned the ledger around to show me. Room 12 was crossed out in red ink. "That room's been closed since the accident." I asked what accident, but he just muttered something about a leak and walked into the back. When I left, I drove around the side of the motel to look for myself, and sure enough, room 12 looked different from the outside. The window was boarded up, the number on the door barely visible, like it hadn't been touched in years. I thought maybe they'd just reopened it and the guy didn't know yet. So I brushed it off, told myself I was overreacting. But that night, when I stopped for gas an hour down the road, I checked my phone and noticed something strange. My camera roll had a new photo. It was taken at 2:17 a.m., the exact time I'd heard the first knock. The picture was dark and grainy, but I could make out the inside of my motel room, the bed, the lamp, and standing in the far corner, a figure, just barely visible, facing the wall. I swear I didn't take that photo. I didn't even have my phone in my hand. My first thought was maybe I'd accidentally hit the shutter when I grabbed it, but the angle didn't make sense. It looked like it was taken from near the ceiling, pointing down at me. I deleted the photo immediately, but I couldn't shake the image from my head. For days, I felt like someone was watching me, even when I was back home. The week after that, curiosity got the better of me. I tried to call the motel. No answer. I Googled it, found an old Yelp page with a couple reviews from years ago. All negative, mostly about the smell or the noise. But one stood out. It was from someone named Aaron, posted 6 years back. It said, "If they try to put you in room 12, don't take it. I stayed there one night and something was in the wall. I could hear it moving. It whispered my name." I swear my hands went cold reading that. I went down a rabbit hole, searching for Sunset Pines Motel Room 12, and found a local news article from 2009 about a fire in one of the units. A guest had died, apparently trapped inside when the door jammed. They said the cause was a heater malfunction. Guess which room it was? I sat there staring at my screen, thinking about that sound I heard behind the wall. That breathing, those knocks. I called the motel again out of pure impulse, and this time someone picked up, a woman's voice. I said, "Hi, I stayed there last week. Room 12. And before I could finish, she interrupted softly. "You shouldn't have been in that room." I froze. Her voice sounded familiar, calm, almost sad. "Who is this?" I asked, but she didn't answer. Just breathing on the other end, slow and deep. Exactly like the sound I'd heard through the wall. Then she whispered, "It still remembers you," and the line went dead. I blocked the number, deleted the motel info, and tried to forget about it, but sometimes forgetting isn't an option. A few nights later, during another storm, I woke up to a sound I knew too well. 3 knocks. Soft, steady from the wall beside my bed. It couldn't be real. I live in an apartment, 3rd floor. No one on the other side of that wall. But it came again, clear as day. I told myself it was the pipes, the thunder, anything but what I knew deep down. When I got up the courage to touch the wall, it felt cold, almost damp, and for just a second, I thought I felt it knock back. I haven't been on a road trip since. I don't drive at night anymore, especially not when it rains. But the weirdest thing? Last week I got an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a motel key, old brass with a faded red tag. The number stamped on it, 12. I threw it in a drawer. But sometimes at night, when it's quiet and the rain starts up, I swear I can hear it moving, tapping softly like it's trying to get my attention. And every time I close my eyes, I see that photo again. The one I didn't take. Me sleeping in that bed, while something in the corner watched, waiting for me to notice. I've stayed in a lot of motels in my life, but there's one that still messes with my head every time I think about it, and even after all these years, I still don't know what really happened that night. I was driving cross-country for a job relocation. Just me, my old Chevy, and a couple of suitcases. It had been raining for hours, the kind of rain that turns everything into a blur, and the highway felt endless. My GPS kept rerouting because of flooding warnings, and before I knew it, I was off the main road, driving through backwoods that looked abandoned. Then, out of nowhere, I saw this glowing sign through the mist. Evergreen Lodge, vacancy. It looked old but well kept. A long single story, building with green shutters and a big oak tree leaning over the roof. I was exhausted and running on bad gas station coffee, so I pulled in. The gravel crunched under my tires, and I swear the rain eased up as I parked, like the storm didn't want to come too close. I jogged to the office under the awning, ringing the little bell on the counter. The lobby looked vintage, like stepping back into the 70s. Floral wallpaper, a radio quietly playing some old love song, and a faint smell of pine cleaner. The clerk came out from a back room, a tall, skinny guy in his 40s, hair slicked back, wearing a brown sweater that looked too warm for the season. He smiled, polite but tired, and said, "Long night, huh?" I nodded, told him I just needed a room for the night. He pulled out an actual ledger instead of a computer, flipped a few pages and said, "Room 6 should be fine." He handed me a brass key on a leather tag. No card reader, no forms. I asked if he wanted my license or something, but he just said, "You can settle up in the morning. You look like you need rest." Room 6 was near the middle of the row. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, the sound echoing off the tin gutters. I opened the door and was surprised how nice it looked. Old-fashioned but clean, like a place that used to matter. There was a little round clock on the nightstand ticking softly, a mint on the pillow, and an old rotary phone by the bed. I showered, changed into a t-shirt, and collapsed into the sheets. That's when I noticed something weird. The air was completely still. No hum from the heater, no rain sounds anymore, not even crickets. Just silence, except for the faint ticking of that clock. I must have drifted off, but sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. It wasn't a noise exactly, more like the sense that something had changed. The room looked the same, but the clock was wrong. The hands were spinning backward, not fast, but steady, like time itself was slipping in reverse. I sat up, blinking, and it stopped instantly, hands frozen at 12 on. Then the phone rang, loud and sharp, cutting through the silence. I jumped, grabbed it, and said hello, but there was nothing on the other end except static. Then faintly, like someone whispering right behind the hiss, I heard my name, clear, calm. "Don't leave yet." My stomach dropped. I hung up, pulled on my jeans, and opened the door to leave. But the hallway, or whatever you call the outside walkway of motels, didn't look right. It wasn't raining anymore. It wasn't even wet. The air smelled different, like dust and wood smoke. The parking lot was empty, and my car was gone. Just gone. The only light came from a single bulb above the office door, flickering. I started walking that way, heart pounding, trying to make sense of it, and I noticed every other room door was closed, except room 4. It was wide open, and faint yellow light spilled out. As I passed, I heard voices and laughter, muffled conversation, like a party from another era. Curiosity got the best of me, and I peeked in. Inside were 4 or 5 people sitting around a small table, smoking, drinking, all dressed like it was the 1960s. They didn't even look up at me. The TV was playing some black and white movie, and there was an old jukebox humming in the corner. For a second, I thought maybe I'd stumbled into some kind of theme event. But when I blinked, the room was empty again. No people, no light, no sound. Just an old cigarette burning down in an ashtray that shouldn't have been there. I ran to the office, but the door was locked. I banged on it, yelled for the clerk, but no answer. When I turned around, the building looked darker, older. Paint peeling, vines creeping up the sides like it had been abandoned for years. My head was spinning. I ran back to my room, or tried to. The numbers on the doors were different now, rearranged somehow, like they were written in different fonts. When I finally found room 6, the door was open and the bed was made, perfectly neat, like no one had slept there. The clock was gone. The phone was gone. My bag was still there, but when I checked inside, my clothes were dusty, old, like they'd been sitting for months. I just grabbed my stuff and bolted. Outside, I saw a road through the trees. I could see my car parked out there, but it looked like it was covered in dirt and leaves, like it had been sitting for years. I didn't stop. I sprinted to it, unlocked it, jumped in, and tore out of there, tires kicking up mud. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the wheel. The weird thing was, when I looked in the rearview mirror, the motel wasn't there anymore, just darkness and trees. I kept driving until I saw a gas station with lights on and pulled in. The clerk looked at me like I was a ghost, soaked in sweat, mud all over me, probably pale as hell. I told him what happened, and he just stared. Then he said, "Evergreen Lodge? That place burned down in the 80s. They never rebuilt it." I didn't believe him until he pulled up an article on his phone. Sure enough, there it was. Fire in 1984. Electrical fault. Guests killed, including the night clerk. 6 rooms total. Room 6 listed as the one where the fire started. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. Everything I saw, everything I touched, it was too real to be a dream. The next morning when I went back with a cop, I called them. I wasn't letting that go. There was nothing there but a crumbling foundation covered in weeds. But right there, half buried in the dirt near where the sign must have stood, was a piece of metal. I picked it up. It was a key tag, rusted, cracked, but still readable. "The number 6, engraved clear as day?" I've told myself 100 times I must have fallen asleep behind the wheel, maybe dreamed the whole thing. But there are details that don't add up. The dust on my clothes, the missing gas from my tank, the faint smell of smoke that lingered in my car for weeks after. I don't talk about it much anymore, but sometimes, when I drive past old motels in the rain, I swear I see that same green sign flickering in the distance. And the weirdest part? A couple of months ago, I stayed at a new place off Route 9. Different name, different look, modernized, clean. But when I checked in, the clerk smiled and said, "Welcome to the Evergreen." I laughed it off. Just a coincidence, right? But when I got to my room, the key tag hanging from the door said 6. And sitting on the nightstand, next to a ticking clock that shouldn't have been there, was a little round mint. Same brand, same wrapper, like it had been waiting for me to come back and finally check out. I used to travel a lot for work, driving long stretches between small towns doing equipment repairs. so I stayed in motels more times than I can count. But there's one night that still sticks with me, not because of what I saw, but because I'm still not sure if I ever really left that place. It was raining, of course. One of those steady gray downpours that makes the world feel half asleep. I'd been driving since dawn, the wipers squeaking, radio fading in and out, and when the fog started creeping down from the hills, I figured I'd better pull off. The first sign I saw said, Bluebird Motor Inn, vacancy, cable TV, and hot showers. The sign buzzed faintly, the O in motor flickering, the light catching on puddles that shimmered like mirrors. I pulled in. There were maybe 4 cars total in the lot, all old models, maybe abandoned. The office light was on, though, so I grabbed my overnight bag and jogged through the drizzle. The lobby looked like every other cheap motel lobby, faded postcards on a corkboard, dusty brochures, a snack machine with only gum left in it. A woman came out from behind a curtain, late 50s. Gray hair pinned up, smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her name tag said Martha, and she spoke with that friendly but tired tone that people use when they've had the same job forever. She said they had just a few guests tonight and handed me a key attached to a heavy wooden tag. Room 3, she said. Nice view of the rain. I joked that any view was fine as long as the bed was dry. She chuckled softly, then added something strange. If you hear tapping on the window, don't open the curtains. Some of the pipes knock when it rains. I laughed awkwardly, said sure, and headed out. Room 3 was at the far end, next to a row of trees that bent under the rain. The air smelled like wet pine and asphalt. Inside, the room looked frozen in time. Floral bedspread, old TV, wallpaper that had yellowed a bit. But it was clean and warm, and the hum of the heater felt comforting after that drive. I kicked off my boots, made some instant coffee from the packets on the counter, and sat on the bed scrolling through old emails. The rain outside had picked up, hitting the window in soft rhythms, and I remember thinking how peaceful it sounded. Then, around midnight, I heard it, a soft tap on the glass. Not random rain hits, deliberate, steady, tap, tap, tap. I froze, thinking maybe a branch was hitting the pane, but there were no trees right by the window. They were set back a few feet. I walked closer, heart already starting to beat faster. The curtain was drawn, but I could see the faint silhouette of something outside, like someone standing just beyond the glass. My first instinct was to whip the curtain open, but Martha's voice popped into my head. Don't open the curtains. I told myself it had to be a reflection, maybe one of the other guests walking by, but the tapping came again, louder, more insistent, like fingernails against the glass. I stepped back, grabbed the remote, and turned the TV on for background noise. The picture came up fuzzy, no signal, but I left it playing the static just so I wouldn't hear the silence between taps. Eventually it stopped, and I convinced myself it was nothing, crawled into bed, and pulled the blanket over my head like a kid. I must have fallen asleep, but sometime later, I woke up to this faint whispering sound, just barely above the hum of the heater. It was like someone was standing right outside, whispering my name. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I sat up and stared at the window. The whispering stopped, replaced by that slow tapping again, except now it was coming from the inside. I jumped out of bed, flipped on every light, and stood there in the middle of the room, shaking. The window was closed, locked tight, but the glass looked fogged up from moisture, and in the center of it was the shape of a handprint. Small, slender, pressed from the outside in. I didn't sleep after that. I sat up till dawn, lights on, watching the window like a guard. When morning finally came, I packed my stuff and went to the office to check out. Martha wasn't there. Just a note on the counter that said, "Back soon." I waited a few minutes, but something felt off, so I decided to just leave the key. As I set it down, I noticed a stack of old Polaroids sitting beside the bell, all of them showing guests standing outside their rooms, smiling. But a few of the photos were water damaged, and on the edges, you could see something faint in the background, a blurry white shape near the windows. I flipped through them until I found one labeled Room 3, July 1989. The man in the picture looked nervous, standing in front of the same room I'd stayed in, and behind him, in the window reflection, you could clearly see a woman's face, pale and staring straight at the camera. I left right then. I didn't even look back at the motel until I was miles down the highway. I told myself it was a trick of light, my tired brain making shapes from shadows. But that night, when I got to a different motel 2 towns over, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The window in that room, spotless when I'd walked in, had a faint smudge dead center, like someone had pressed their hand against it recently. I wiped it away, tried to forget it, but every time I've stayed in a motel since then, no matter how new or clean, I always check the window first. Sometimes I find fingerprints that weren't there before. About a year later, I had a job near that same route and figured I'd pass by just to see if the Bluebird Motor Inn was still there. Except when I got to where it should have been, it was gone. Not closed, gone. The lot was empty, grass growing over cracked pavement. No building, no sign, no trace it had ever existed. I stopped at a gas station nearby and asked the cashier about it. He said that place had been torn down years ago after a fire. Weird thing, he added. They said it started in room 3. Guest reported seeing a woman outside his window before it went up. I just nodded and left, too numb to say anything. Since then I've tried to find records online. Old listings, anything, but there's nothing. No photos, no address, no history. It's like the motel vanished from reality. But the creepy part is, a few months ago I stayed at a chain motel off Route 14, far from that area, and when I checked in, the front desk clerk was this older woman with gray hair and that same tired smile. Her name tag said Martha. She looked at me for a long second before saying, "You look familiar. Didn't you stay with us before?" I just shook my head, said no, and took my key. Room 3 again. That night, it rained harder than I'd ever seen. Around midnight, I heard the first tap. Slow, careful, coming from the window. I didn't open the curtains this time. I didn't have to, because through the thin motel drapes, I could already see her silhouette, the same shape I'd seen all those years ago, standing completely still, facing in. And when I finally gathered enough courage to whisper, "What do you want?" the tapping stopped, but on the fogged glass, clear as daylight, new letters appeared, written by an invisible finger from the outside. "Still here."